The citadel stood like a black tooth against the winter sky, jagged and wrong. Elara crouched in the shadow of a collapsed watchtower, her breath misting in the freezing air. Her fingers, wrapped in threadbare gloves with the tips cut away, flexed against the cold stone. She'd been watching the ruins for an hour now, waiting for movement, for guards, for anything that would tell her this place was still alive. Nothing. Just wind, just snow, just the skeletal remains of a fortress that had been abandoned 3 centuries ago. Good, she thought. Dead places don't fight back. She pulled the folded parchment from inside her coat and studied it one more time, even though she'd memorized every line. The map was old, the ink faded to a brown ghost of itself, but the path was clear, through the eastern breach, past the Hall of Shields, down into the throne room, and there, beneath the Seat of Kings, the Heartstone artifact, the thing that would buy her sister's life. Elara folded the map and tucked it away, her jaw tight. 2 days left. The slavers had given her 7, and 5 were already gone. If she didn't return with payment, with something valuable enough to matter, they'd sell Mira to the blood pits in Carthax, or worse. No pressure, she told herself, and started moving. The breach in the eastern wall was exactly where the map promised, a gaping wound in the stone, wide enough to ride a horse through. Elara slipped inside, her boots crunching softly on frost-covered rubble. The air inside was colder than outside somehow, denser, like stepping into a crypt. She paused, letting her eyes adjust to the darkness. Moonlight filtered through cracks in the ceiling, painting silver stripes across broken furniture and shattered armor. Everything was covered in dust. Everything was still. Elara reached into her satchel and pulled out a small vial of glow moss, expensive but necessary. She cracked it open, and pale green light bloomed in her palm, just enough to see by. The glow reflected off something metallic ahead, a corridor, lined with suits of armor that stood at attention like an honor guard for ghosts. She moved forward, her footsteps careful, deliberate. The map had mentioned traps. The Citadel does not surrender its secrets willingly, the old merchant had said when he sold it to her. It was built to keep things in, not out. Elara didn't like the sound of that, but she didn't have a choice. The corridor stretched on, longer than it should have been. The armored figures watched her pass with empty visors, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they were aware, that something behind those black slits was tracking her movement. She shook her head. Stop it. They're just metal. Just old, dead metal. Then one of them moved. Elara froze. The suit of armor to her left, a massive thing with a dented breastplate and a warhammer taller than she was, shifted slightly. The creak of old metal echoed through the corridor like a scream in a library. Elara's hand went to the dagger at her hip. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She waited, every muscle coiled, ready to run or fight or... The armor settled, just the building shifting, just old joints finally giving in to gravity. She exhaled slowly and kept moving. The Hall of Shields was exactly as the map described, a vast, circular chamber with a domed ceiling that had partially collapsed, letting in shafts of moonlight that looked like pillars holding up the dark. The walls were lined with shields, hundreds of them, thousands maybe, each one bearing a different crest. Different houses, different oaths, all of them broken now. Elara crossed the hall quickly, her eyes scanning the floor for pressure plates, tripwires, anything that would turn this room into a death trap. But there was nothing, just dust and silence and the faint smell of rust. The far side of the hall opened into a staircase that descended into deeper darkness. Elara hesitated at the top, peering down into the black. The air rising from below was even colder, and it carried a strange smell. Not decay exactly, but something old, something that had been locked away for a very long time. The throne room, she reminded herself. Just get to the throne room, grab the heartstone, and get out. You can do this. She started down the stairs. The descent seemed endless. The staircase spiraled down and down, the walls pressing in on either side, the ceiling so low in places that Elara had to duck. The glow moss in her hand flickered once and her heart seized, but it steadied, the light holding. Finally, the stairs ended. Elara stepped into the throne room and for a moment she forgot how to breathe. It was massive. The ceiling soared overhead, lost in shadow despite the moonlight pouring through a jagged hole in the roof. The floor was black marble, polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the broken sky above. And at the far end of the room, elevated on a dais of obsidian steps, sat the throne, the seat of kings, and on it, a figure. Elara's breath caught. He sat perfectly still, clad in full-plate armor so black it seemed to swallow the light around it. His gauntleted hands rested on the arms of the throne, and across his lap lay a great sword, massive, ancient, its blade etched with runes that glowed faintly in the dark. A statue, Elara told herself. Just a statue. Some monument to a king who died centuries ago. But statues didn't feel like this. Didn't make the air around them hum with pressure, with weight, with the sense that something was watching. Elara forced herself to move forward. Her boots clicked softly on the marble, each step echoing like a drum beat. She kept her eyes on the throne's base, where the map indicated the heartstone would be hidden. There would be a mechanism, a hidden compartment, something. She reached the dais and knelt, setting the glow moss down beside her. Her fingers traced the carvings on the obsidian, symbols she didn't recognize, worn smooth by time. She pressed on one, then another, searching for the trigger. Nothing. She tried a different combination. Still nothing. Come on, she thought desperately. It has to be here. It has to. Metal scraped against stone. Elara's head snapped up. The knight's hand had moved. Just a fraction. Just enough to lift one finger from the throne's arm. Her blood turned to ice. Then, slowly, impossibly slowly, the knight's helmeted head turned toward her. The movement was smooth, deliberate, like a predator spotting prey, and from within the darkness of that faceless helm came a sound. Breathing, low, rasping, hollow. Not the breath of a living thing, but not silence either. Elara's hand flew to her dagger, her body tensing to run. The gauntlet shot out with inhuman speed and locked around her wrist like a manacle of ice and iron. She screamed. The grip was crushing, not painful, not yet, but unyielding, like being caught in the jaws of a wolf. Elara twisted, pulling back with all her strength, but the armored hand didn't budge. She might as well have been trying to move a mountain. The knight rose. He stood slowly, the great sword still in his other hand, its tip scraping against the marble with a sound like a blade being drawn across bone. He towered over her, 7 feet tall, maybe more, his armor pristine despite the centuries, his presence so overwhelming it felt like the room itself was shrinking. Elara's dagger was in her free hand now, and she drove it toward the gap between his breastplate and vambrace. The blade shattered. It didn't break. It didn't chip. It shattered, the steel exploding into fragments that clattered uselessly to the floor. The knight tilted his head, and when he spoke, his voice was like wind through a graveyard, layered, echoing, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Why have you come here, thief?" Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. Her mind screamed at her to run, to fight, to do something, but she was trapped, caught, and the thing holding her wasn't human. She forced herself to meet the darkness of his helm, to stare into the void where eyes should have been. Let me go. The knight didn't move, didn't respond, just stood there holding her wrist in that impossible grip, his breath, if it could be called breath, rasping softly in the silence. Then, from somewhere deep within the citadel, a sound rose, a screech, high and sharp, like metal tearing. The knight's head snapped toward the entrance to the throne room. More screeches answered the first, dozens of them, growing closer. Elara felt the temperature drop even further, felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up, and the knight said, in that same hollow, echoing voice, "They have come." The screeches grew louder, closer, accompanied now by the sound of claws scraping against stone. Elara's breath came in short, panicked gasps as she yanked against the knight's grip, but his gauntlet held her fast. "Let me go!" she hissed. The knight's helmeted head turned back toward her, and for a moment she thought she saw something flicker in the darkness of his visor. A faint green glow, like foxfire in a tomb. "You should not be here," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "The wards were meant to keep intruders out. You have broken them." "I didn't break anything," Elara shot back, her free hand still gripping the hilt of her shattered dagger. "I just walked in. Your wards are 300 years old. They're broken." The screeches were in the Hall of Shields now. Elara could hear the skittering, scraping sounds of multiple creatures moving fast across stone. The knight released her wrist. Elara stumbled back, clutching her arm. The cold from his gauntlet had seeped into her bones, and her skin felt numb where he'd touched her. "Run," the knight said, raising his greatsword. "What?" "Run or die here." The first creature burst into the throne room. It was a gargoyle, or had been once. Now it was something twisted, corrupted. Its stone body was cracked and oozing black ichor, its wings torn and leathery. Its eyes glowed with the same sickly green light Elara had seen in the knight's visor, and its mouth was full of teeth like broken glass. It shrieked and launched itself at Elara. She dove sideways, rolling across the marble as the gargoyle's claws gouged deep scratches into the floor where she'd been standing. She came up in a crouch, her heart pounding, her hand reaching for a weapon she no longer had. The knight moved. One moment he was standing on the dais. The next, he was between Elara and the gargoyle, his greatsword already in motion. The blade sang through the air, a sound like a bell being struck, and cleaved the gargoyle clean in half. The creature didn't have time to scream. It simply fell apart, its two halves hitting the floor with wet, heavy thuds. Black ichor pooled around the remains, hissing and steaming like acid. Elara stared, her mind struggling to process what she'd just seen. He'd moved faster than anything that size should be able to move. Faster than thought. 3 more gargoyles poured into the throne room, their wings flapping uselessly as they scuttled across the floor and walls like insects. One of them leapt at the knight from above, claws extended. The knight didn't even look up. He simply raised his sword and drove it upward, spearing the creature through the chest. It shrieked once, then went limp. He flicked the blade, and the gargoyle's corpse flew across the room, slamming into the wall hard enough to crack the stone. The other 2 circled him, hissing, their green eyes fixed on Elara. "Behind me," the knight commanded. Elara didn't argue. She scrambled to her feet and pressed her back against the dais, her eyes wide as the gargoyles split up, one moving left, one moving right, trying to flank him. The knight turned his head slightly, tracking both of them at once, waiting. The gargoyle on the left lunged first. The knight sidestepped, his movements smooth and precise, and brought his sword down in a brutal overhead strike. The gargoyle's head separated from its body, both pieces clattering to the floor. The second gargoyle didn't wait. It launched itself at the knight's back, claws outstretched. The knight spun faster than Elara's eyes could follow and caught the creature by the throat with his free hand. The gargoyle thrashed, its claws scrabbling uselessly against his armor, but the knight's grip didn't falter. He lifted the creature off the ground, its legs kicking, and then he crushed it. The gargoyle's neck shattered with a sound like breaking pottery, and the light in its eyes guttered out. The knight dropped the corpse and stood there, surrounded by the bodies of the creatures, his sword dripping black ichor. Silence fell over the throne room. Elara's legs felt weak. She slid down the side of the dais until she was sitting on the cold marble, her hands shaking. She'd seen fights before, brutal ones in the alleys and blood pits of the lower city, but nothing like this. Nothing so fast, so efficient, so inhuman. The knight turned to face her. The green glow in his visor had faded, leaving only darkness. "You are injured," he said. "What?" Elara's voice came out hoarse. She looked down at herself and realized there was a long gash across her forearm, shallow but bleeding. One of the gargoyles must have clipped her when she'd rolled. She pressed her hand against the wound, hissing at the sting. "I'm fine." "You are bleeding." "I said I'm fine." She glared up at him, her fear slowly being replaced by anger. "What the hell are you, and what were those things?" The knight was silent for a long moment. Then he lowered his sword, the blade scraping against the marble as he planted its tip on the floor. He stood there, towering over her, his armor reflecting the moonlight like black glass. "I am Kaelen," he said finally. "Warden of the Citadel, last of the silent vigil." "Warden?" Elara pushed herself to her feet, wincing at the pain in her arm. "The Citadel's been abandoned for 300 years. There's no one left to guard." "You are incorrect." "Oh, really?" She gestured at the ruined throne room, at the collapsed ceiling and the bodies of the gargoyles. "Because it looks pretty abandoned to me." Kaelen's helmeted head tilted slightly, as if he were considering her words. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost uncertain. 300 years? "Yeah, 300. You've been sitting on that throne for 3 centuries, apparently." Kaelen turned away from her, looking up at the shattered ceiling, at the moonlight streaming through. His gauntleted hand tightened slightly on his sword's hilt. "It feels like yesterday," he said, more to himself than to her. "The ceiling, the binding, I remember fire and screaming, and then silence." Elara frowned, her anger fading into confusion. "What are you talking about? What ceiling?" Kaelen didn't answer. He stood there, motionless, staring up at the sky. Elara took a step closer, wincing as her arm throbbed. "Look, I don't know what you are or why you're here, but I need to get something from this room, and then I need to leave. So if you're done having some kind of existential crisis, you cannot leave." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. "Excuse me?" Kaelen turned back to her, and this time there was something almost apologetic in his posture, the slight slump of his shoulders, the way his sword seemed heavier in his hand. "The wards are broken," he said. "The gargoyles you saw, they are only the beginning. The corruption has been festering in the deep places of the Citadel for centuries, held back by the seals I placed. But now those seals are failing. More will come, many more. Then I'll run," Elara said, her voice rising. "I'll get out of here before they—" "The doors are sealed, the passages collapsed. When you broke the outer ward, you triggered the Citadel's final defense, the lockdown. Nothing enters, Nothing leaves. Elara felt the walls closing in on her. You're lying. I do not lie. Then unseal it, she shouted, her voice echoing through the throne room. You're the warden, right? So open the damn doors. Kaelen shook his head slowly. I cannot. The lockdown was designed to contain the corruption if the wards ever failed. It can only be undone from the soul altar, deep within the Citadel's heart. Then take me there. I cannot leave this room. Elara stared at him. What? I am bound, Kaelen said quietly. Chained to this throne by the same magic that sealed the corruption. I have not moved from this chamber in 300 years, until now. But you just, Elara gestured at the dead gargoyles. You just fought them. You moved. Because you broke the ward, the binding loosened. But I cannot leave the Citadel. I cannot cross its threshold. I am trapped. Elara's mind raced. She looked at the knight, at Kaelen, and saw for the first time the way he stood. Not like a warrior ready for battle, but like a man carrying a weight too heavy to bear. His shoulders were hunched. His head was bowed. Even his voice, hollow and echoing as it was, carried a note of exhaustion. So we're both trapped, she said bitterly. Yes. Elara turned away, pacing across the throne room, her mind racing. 2 days. She had 2 days left to save Mira, and she was trapped in a collapsing fortress with a cursed knight and an army of monsters. Think, she told herself. There has to be a way out. There's always a way out. She stopped and turned back to Kaelen. This soul altar, you said it can undo the lockdown? Yes. And it's deep in the Citadel? In the lowest level, the sanctum of echoes. Can you get there? Or are you bound to this room? Kaelen was silent for a moment. Then he said slowly, The binding has weakened. I can move within the Citadel now, but I cannot leave it. But you can reach the altar? Yes. Elara took a deep breath. Then we make a deal. You take me to the altar. We undo the lockdown, and then we both get what we want. You get to do whatever it is you need to do, and I get out of here alive. Kaelen tilted his head. And if I refuse? Then we both die here, Elara said flatly. Because I'm not giving up. I'll find a way out, even if I have to claw through these walls with my bare hands, and you'll be stuck here, alone, for another 300 years. Kaelen was silent. Then, slowly, he raised his sword and rested it on his shoulder. Very well, he said. We have an accord. Elara felt a flicker of hope. Small, fragile, but real. Good, she said. Then let's get moving. The sooner we reach that altar, the sooner I can get out of this nightmare. Kaelen gestured toward the far side of the throne room, where a doorway led deeper into the Citadel. This way. Stay close. The corruption grows stronger the deeper we go. Elara fell into step behind him, clutching her bleeding arm. As they left the throne room, she glanced back at the shattered bodies of the gargoyles, at the black ichor pooling on the marble, and she wondered, not for the first time, what kind of monster she'd just made a deal with. The corridor beyond the throne room was a throat of stone and shadow. Elara followed Kaelen through the darkness, her boots scraping softly against the uneven floor. The glow moss in her hand cast weak green light that barely reached the walls, but Kaelen needed no light. He moved with absolute certainty, his armored footsteps echoing like a funeral drum. The air grew colder with each step. Elara's breath came out in thick clouds, and she pulled her coat tighter around herself, wincing as the fabric brushed against her wounded arm. The gash had stopped bleeding, but it throbbed with each heartbeat. How far? She asked, her voice too loud in the silence. Kaelen didn't turn. Far. That's not an answer. It is the only answer I have. The Citadel shifts. Passages that existed yesterday may be gone today. Rooms that were sealed may now be open. Time moves differently here. Elara frowned. What do you mean, time moves differently? Kaelen was silent for several steps. Then, 300 years, you said. To me, it has been moments and eternities, both at once. Elara didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. They walked on. The corridor opened into a vast chamber that might have once been a barracks. Rows of stone bunks lined the walls, each one covered in frost. Rusted weapons hung from racks. Swords, spears, axes, all of them corroded beyond use. And on the floor, scattered like broken dolls, were bones. Elara stopped at the threshold, her stomach turning. There were dozens of skeletons, maybe hundreds. They lay where they'd fallen, still wearing the remnants of armor, their hands clutching weapons they'd never gotten to use. Some were curled in on themselves, as if they'd died trying to protect something. Others were sprawled out, their bones scattered, as if they'd been torn apart. What happened here? Elara whispered. Kaelen stood in the center of the room, his helmeted head turning slowly, taking in the carnage. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than before, almost mournful. The ceiling. When the corruption was at its peak, when the abyss threatened to consume the Citadel, the king ordered a final defense. Every soldier, every guard, every soul within these walls was called to the sanctum. They were to hold the line while I performed the ritual. And? Elara asked, though she already knew the answer. They held, and they died. Kaelen moved toward one of the skeletons, a small one, barely more than a child. He knelt beside it, his gauntleted hand hovering over the skull, not quite touching. I told them to flee. I told the king to evacuate the Citadel, but he refused. He said the corruption could not be allowed to spread, that if it meant sacrificing every life here, so be it. Kaelen's hand curled into a fist. I thought I could save them. I thought if I completed the ritual fast enough, if I bound the corruption before it reached them. He trailed off. Elara felt something twist in her chest, something uncomfortably close to pity. She pushed it down. She couldn't afford pity, not for a cursed night, not when Mira's life was on the line. You failed, she said flatly. Kaelen stood, his fist still clenched. Yes, I failed. He turned and walked toward the far side of the chamber, where another doorway waited. Elara followed, stepping carefully around the bones, trying not to look at the small skull Kaelen had knelt beside. They descended a spiral staircase that seemed to go on forever, the walls pressing in closer with each turn. Elara's legs burned, her wounded arm ached, and her lungs felt tight from the cold, stale air. But she didn't complain. Complaining wouldn't get her out of here any faster. Finally, the stairs ended in a small, circular room. There was no other exit, just stone walls, a low ceiling, and a single iron door set into the far wall. Kaelen stopped in front of the door, his hand resting on its surface. Beyond this point, the corruption is stronger. The creatures you saw in the throne room, the gargoyles, they are merely scouts, scavengers. Deeper in the Citadel, the corruption has taken root. It has grown, evolved. Evolved into what? Elara asked. Things that should not exist. Ilara's hand went to her belt where her shattered dagger had been. She had nothing now, no weapon, no way to defend herself. Kaelen noticed. He reached to his side and drew a long knife from a sheath on his belt, a simple blade, steel and leather, nothing fancy. He held it out to her. Take this. Elara stared at the knife. then at Kaelen. Why? Because you will need it, and because I cannot protect you from everything. She took the knife, testing its weight. It was heavier than her dagger had been, but well balanced. The blade was sharp, the edge clean despite centuries of disuse. Thanks, she said, and meant it. Kaelen nodded once, then pushed open the iron door. The room beyond was a nightmare. It had once been a chapel, Elara thought. There were pews, or what was left of them, scattered across the floor like broken ribs. An altar stood at the far end, cracked down the middle, its surface stained black. And covering every inch of the walls, the ceiling, the floor, were veins. Not metaphorical veins, actual pulsing veins of black ichor that throbbed with a sickly green light. They spread across the stone like roots, like infection, like something alive and hungry. Elara felt bile rise in her throat. What is that? The corruption, Kaelen said. This is what I sealed away, what I have been holding back for 300 years. You call this sealed? Elara gestured at the veins, which seemed to pulse faster as she spoke, as if responding to her voice. It's everywhere. It is contained, barely, but the seals are failing. If we do not reach the soul altar soon, the corruption will break free entirely, and when it does, it will spread beyond the Citadel. It will consume the land, the cities, everything. Elara felt cold dread settle in her stomach. How long do we have? Kaelen was silent for a moment, his helmeted head tilted as if listening to something she couldn't hear. Days, perhaps less. Days, Elara repeated numbly. She thought of Mira, locked in a slaver's cage, waiting for a sister who might never come. She thought of the Heartstone, somewhere in this cursed place, the only thing that could buy Mira's freedom, and she thought of the corruption, spreading like a plague, consuming everything in its path. If the corruption breaks free, she said slowly, my sister dies anyway. Everyone dies. Yes. Elara closed her eyes, her hand tightening on the knife Kaelen had given her. She'd come here for one reason, to save Mira. But if she left now, if she somehow found a way out and abandoned Kaelen to his fate, the corruption would spread, and Mira would die anyway, along with everyone else. She opened her eyes. The soul altar. You said it can undo the lockdown. Can it also stop the corruption permanently? Kaelen turned to look at her, and for the first time, she thought she heard something like hope in his voice. Yes, if the ritual is completed, if the binding is renewed, the corruption can be sealed again for another 300 years or longer. And what happens to you? Elara asked. If the binding is renewed? Kaelen was silent for a long moment. Then, I remain, bound to the Citadel, bound to the throne, alone. For how long? Forever. The word hung in the air between them, heavy and final. Elara stared at him, at this hollow knight, this cursed guardian who had given up his body, his life, his everything, to protect a world that had forgotten him. And she felt that uncomfortable twist in her chest again, sharper this time. That's not fair, she said quietly. Fairness is irrelevant. This is my duty, my burden. I accepted it willingly. 300 years ago, maybe. But now? Elara shook her head. You've done enough. You've suffered enough. There has to be another way. There is no other way. There's always another way, Elara said, echoing her own words from earlier. We just have to find it. Kaelen tilted his head, and she thought she saw that faint green glow flicker in his visor again. Curiosity, maybe, or confusion. Why do you care? You do not know me. You came here to steal, not to save. I came here to save my sister, Elara corrected. And yeah, I was going to steal to do it, but that doesn't mean I'm okay with leaving you to rot in this place for eternity. You are strange. I get that a lot. Elara squared her shoulders. Look, here's the deal. We go to the soul altar together. We figure out how to stop the corruption without trapping you here forever. And then we both get out. You get your freedom, I get mine, and the world doesn't end. Everyone wins. It is not that simple. It never is, Elara said. But we're going to try anyway. Deal? Kaelen stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he extended his gauntleted hand. Deal. Elara took his hand. His grip was cold, so cold it burned, but she didn't pull away. She held on, and after a moment, Kaelen's fingers tightened slightly, as if he were testing the reality of the contact. Then he released her and turned toward the far side of the chapel, where another doorway waited, half hidden by the pulsing veins of corruption. Come, we have far to go, and little time. Elara followed, her hand still tingling from the cold of his touch, and as they stepped through the doorway into deeper darkness, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just made a promise she had no idea how to keep. They walked for hours, or what felt like hours. Time had become slippery in the depths of the Citadel, stretching and contracting like something alive. Elara's legs ached, her arm throbbed, and her stomach growled with hunger she couldn't satisfy. Kaelen never stopped, never slowed. He moved through the corridors with mechanical precision, his sword always ready, his helmeted head constantly turning, scanning for threats. Elara had tried talking to him a few times, asking questions about the Citadel, about the corruption, about what had happened 300 years ago. But his answers were short, clipped, as if speaking required effort he couldn't spare. So she'd stopped asking. Now they walked in silence, the only sounds the echo of their footsteps and the distant rhythmic pulse of the corruption, a heartbeat that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Finally, Kaelen stopped. They'd entered a large chamber, some kind of storage room, judging by the empty crates and barrels stacked against the walls. The ceiling was high, and there was a hole in the far wall that let in a shaft of pale light. Moonlight, Elara realized. They were still close enough to the surface to see the sky. We rest here, Kaelen said. Elara nearly collapsed with relief. She found a relatively clean spot on the floor and sat down heavily, her back against a crate. Her legs felt like jelly. Her arm was still bleeding sluggishly, the makeshift bandage she'd tied around it soaked through. Kaelen stood in the center of the room, unmoving, his sword planted point down in the stone floor. "Aren't you going to sit?" Elara asked. "I do not tire." "Right. Because you're... what exactly? A ghost? A spirit? Some kind of magical construct?" Kaelen didn't answer. Elara sighed and pulled out the last of her rations, a piece of hard bread and some dried meat. She ate slowly, trying to make it last, her eyes on Kaelen. He hadn't moved since they'd stopped, hadn't shifted his weight, hadn't adjusted his grip on his sword. He stood like a statue, perfectly still, perfectly silent. It was unnerving. "Do you ever take that armor off?" she asked around a mouthful of bread. "No. Why not?" "Because there is nothing beneath it." Elara stopped chewing. "What?" Kaelen turned his helmeted head toward her. "The ritual that sealed the corruption required a sacrifice. I gave my body, my flesh, my blood. All that remains is my soul, bound to this armor. If I were to remove it, I would cease to exist." Elara stared at him, the bread forgotten in her hand. You're not even human anymore." "I have not been human for 300 years. She didn't know what to say to that. The idea of it, of being trapped inside armor, unable to feel, unable to touch, unable to be, was so horrifying that her mind shied away from it. "Does it hurt?" she asked quietly. Kaelen was silent for a long moment. Then, "I do not remember what pain feels like, or warmth, or cold. I remember the concepts, but not the sensations. It is like trying to recall a dream. You know it happened, but the details are gone." Elara set down her bread, her appetite suddenly gone. "That sounds like hell." "It is duty." "Duty," Elara repeated bitterly. "Right, because duty makes it all worth it." "Does it not?" Kaelen asked. "You came here for your sister. You risk your life for her. Is that not duty?" "That's different," Elara said. "That's love. That's family." "And the people I protected, the kingdom I served, were they not also family, in a way?" Elara didn't have an answer to that. Kaelen turned away, his attention shifting to the far side of the room. "Rest. We move again soon." But Elara couldn't rest. Her mind was too full of questions, too full of the image of Kaelen, this hollow knight, this ghost in armor, standing alone in the dark for 300 years. She watched as he moved to the corner of the room and knelt, his gauntleted hands running over a section of his armor, the pauldron on his left shoulder where a deep gouge marred the black metal. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Repairing." "You can do that?" "The armor is part of me. I can sense its damage, and I can mend it, to a degree." Elara stood and crossed the room, curiosity overcoming caution. She knelt beside him, watching as his fingers traced the edges of the gouge. There was no tool, no hammer or weld, just his touch, and slowly, impossibly slowly, the metal began to shift, the edges of the gouge pulling together like skin healing over a wound. "That's incredible," Elara breathed. Kaelen didn't respond. He was focused entirely on the repair, his movements careful, precise. Elara leaned closer, trying to see through the gap in his armor, the space between his breastplate and his pauldron, where the gouge had created a small opening, and she saw it. Not flesh, not bone, not anything solid, just light. Green, ghostly light, flickering like a candle flame in a draught, and beyond the light, deeper in the armor, was darkness. Absolute, empty darkness. Elara's breath caught. Kaelen's hand stilled. Slowly, he turned his helmeted head toward her. "You see," it wasn't a question. Elara swallowed hard. "There's nothing there. You're just empty." Kaelen finished. "Yes, I am the Hollow Knight, a shell, a vessel, nothing more." Elara sat back on her heels, her mind reeling. She'd known intellectually that Kaelen wasn't human, but seeing it, seeing the void where a person should be, made it real in a way that words couldn't. "How do you even exist?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Will," Kaelen said simply. "My soul refuses to let go. It clings to this armor, to this purpose, because without it, there is nothing. I am nothing." "That's not true," Elara said, surprising herself. "You're not nothing. You're still here, still fighting. That has to mean something." Kaelen's hand returned to the gouge, and the metal continued to mend itself, the gap slowly closing. "Perhaps, or perhaps I am simply too stubborn to die." Elara almost smiled at that. I can relate. They sat in silence for a while, Kaelen repairing his armor, Elara watching. And slowly, the fear she'd felt when she first saw the void inside him began to fade, replaced by something else. Understanding, maybe, or empathy. He wasn't a monster. He was just broken, like her, like everyone who'd ever lost something they couldn't get back. "Kaelen," she said quietly. "Yes?" "When we get to the soul altar, if there's a way to free you, to give you your body back, or your life, or whatever it is you lost, I'm going to find it, I promise." Kaelen's hand stilled. He turned to look at her, and for a long moment, he said nothing. Then, "Why?" "Because no one should have to be alone for 300 years, Elara said. "Not even a ghost." Kaelen stared at her, and she thought she saw the green light in his visor flicker, brighter, warmer, like a flame catching. "You are kind," he said finally. "Foolish, but kind." "I've been called worse," Elara said with a tired smile. Kaelen returned to his work, and Elara leaned back against the wall, her eyes growing heavy. The exhaustion she'd been holding at bay was finally catching up to her, and she felt herself starting to drift. "Kaelen?" she murmured. "Yes?" "Don't let me sleep too long. We still have a long way to go. I will wake you." "Promise?" "I promise." Elara's eyes closed, and within moments she was asleep. Kaelen sat in the darkness, his armor fully repaired, and watched her. She slept fitfully, her brow furrowed, her hand twitching as if reaching for something in her dreams. And for the first time in 300 years, Kaelen felt something stir in the void where his heart used to be. Not warmth, not quite, but something close. Something that felt almost like hope. Elara woke to the sound of scraping metal. She jerked upright, her hand flying to the knife at her belt, her heart hammering. For a disorienting moment, she didn't know where she was. Then the memories flooded back. The Citadel, the corruption, Kaelen. The Hollow Knight stood near the doorway, his sword drawn, his helmeted head tilted as if listening to something beyond the walls. "What is it?" Elara whispered, pushing herself to her feet. Her legs protested, still sore from the endless walking, but she ignored the pain. "Movement! Below us! Something large!" Elara's grip tightened on her knife. "The corruption?" "Yes, it knows we are here. It is hunting." The word sent ice through her veins. "Then we need to move. Now." Kaelen nodded and gestured toward the doorway. "This way. Stay close. Do not stray from the path." They left the storage room and descended deeper into the Citadel. The corridors here were different, narrower, older, the stone walls slick with moisture that had frozen into sheets of ice. The temperature had dropped even further, and Elara's breath came out in thick clouds that hung in the air like ghosts. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to conserve warmth, but it was useless. The cold seeped through her coat, through her clothes, into her bones. Her teeth chattered, and her fingers had gone numb despite her gloves. Kaelen noticed. He stopped and turned to face her. "You are cold." "I'm fine," Elara lied, though her voice shook. "You are not fine. Your lips are blue. Your hands are shaking. If you continue like this, you will freeze." "Then we'll move faster," Elara said stubbornly. "The sooner we reach the altar, the sooner we can get out of this icebox." Kaelen stared at her for a moment, then shook his head. "No, we rest. You need warmth." "There's no time. If you freeze to death, there will be even less time." His voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. "Come, there is a place nearby, the ice catacombs. They are dangerous, but they will provide shelter." Elara wanted to argue, but another violent shiver ran through her body, and she realized he was right. She was freezing. If she didn't warm up soon, she wouldn't make it another hour. "Fine," she said through chattering teeth. "Lead the way." The entrance to the ice catacombs was a jagged hole in the floor, descending into darkness. Kaelen went first, his armored form disappearing into the black, and Elara followed, her hands gripping the rough stone as she climbed down. The catacombs were exactly what their name suggested, a maze of tunnels carved into ice and stone, their walls lined with alcoves that held frozen bodies. Elara tried not to look at them, at the faces preserved in ice, their expressions twisted in fear or pain or resignation, but it was impossible to ignore them. They were everywhere. "Who were they?" she asked, her voice echoing strangely in the frozen space. "The fallen, those who died during the sealing. The king ordered their bodies brought here to be preserved. He said they deserved to be remembered. But no one remembers them," Elara said quietly. "The Citadel's been abandoned for 300 years. No one even knows they're here." "I know," Kaelen said. "I remember." They walked deeper into the catacombs, the ice walls reflecting the faint green glow of Elara's glow moss, creating an eerie, shifting light. The cold here was even worse than in the corridors above, so intense it felt like a physical weight pressing down on her. Elara's legs began to give out. She stumbled, catching herself against the wall, her vision blurring at the edges. I'm okay," she gasped, but even she didn't believe it. Kaelen turned and saw her swaying, her face pale, her lips nearly white. He moved without hesitation. In one smooth motion, he sheathed his sword, stepped forward, and lifted her into his arms. Elara's protest died in her throat as she felt the cold of his armor against her body, so cold it burned. But beneath the cold, there was something else, a warmth, faint, barely perceptible, but real. "What?" she started, but Kaelen was already moving, carrying her deeper into the catacombs. "Do not speak. Conserve your strength." Elara wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she could walk on her own, but the truth was she couldn't. Her body had reached its limit. So she let him carry her, her head resting against the cold metal of his breastplate, and tried to focus on that strange warmth she'd felt. It was coming from inside the armor, from the void where his body should have been. The green light, his soul, was generating heat, not much, but enough to keep her from slipping into hypothermia. "You're warm," she murmured, her voice slurred with exhaustion. "I am not. The armor is cold. You are feeling my soul. It burns, even without a body to contain it." "Burns?" Elara's eyes drifted closed. "That's poetic." "It is truth." Kaelen carried her to a small alcove, one that was empty of bodies, and set her down gently against the wall. Then he knelt in front of her, his gauntleted hands hovering near her face, but not quite touching. "You need to stay awake. If you fall asleep here, you may not wake." "I know," Elara said, forcing her eyes open. I'm trying." Kaelen was silent for a moment. Then he did something unexpected. He sat down beside her, his back against the wall, and pulled her close, not roughly, but carefully, as if she were something fragile. His armored arm wrapped around her shoulders, and suddenly that faint warmth intensified, spreading through her body like sunlight breaking through clouds. Elara gasped. "How?" "My soul. I am focusing it, directing the heat toward you. It will not last long, but it should be enough to keep you alive." Elara leaned into him, too cold and too tired to care about pride or propriety. She pressed her cheek against his breastplate, her hands resting on his armored forearm, and felt the warmth seep into her bones. It wasn't like normal warmth. It didn't come from outside, from fire or sunlight. It came from within, from the core of him, from the soul that refused to let go, and it felt safe, like being held by something ancient and unbreakable. "Thank you," she whispered. You do not need to thank me. Yes, I do. You're using your own energy to keep me warm. That has to cost you something. Kaelen was quiet for a moment. Then, it does, but it is worth it. Elara tilted her head to look up at him, at the darkness of his visor. Why, you barely know me. I'm just some thief who broke into your home. You are not just anything, Kaelen said. You are brave and kind, and you made me a promise to find a way to free me. No one has ever promised me that before. I meant it, Elara said. I'm going to keep that promise. I believe you. They sat in silence, the warmth from Kaelen's soul wrapping around Elara like a blanket. Slowly, the shaking stopped. The numbness in her fingers faded. Color returned to her lips, and as she sat there, held by a ghost in armor, Elara realized something that should have terrified her, but somehow didn't. She felt safe. For the first time since entering the Citadel, maybe for the first time in years, she felt truly safe. Kaelen, she said softly. Yes? When this is over, when we stop the corruption and break the lockdown, what will you do? Where will you go? Kaelen was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it. I do not know. I have not thought beyond the ceiling, beyond my duty. I do not know if there is anything for me beyond these walls. There could be, Elara said. If you wanted, you could leave, see the world, find out what 300 years have changed. I'm not certain the world would welcome a hollow knight. Then don't be a hollow knight, Elara said. Be Kaelen, just Kaelen. A person, not a weapon, not a guardian, just someone trying to figure out what comes next. Kaelen's arm tightened slightly around her shoulders, a gesture so small, so human, that it made Elara's chest ache. I would like that, he said quietly. To be just, Kaelen. Then that's what we'll do, Elara said. We'll stop the corruption. We'll break your curse. And then we'll both get to start over. Deal? Deal. Elara smiled and closed her eyes, letting the warmth from Kaelen's soul wash over her. She could feel her strength returning, could feel her body recovering from the brutal cold. And she could feel something else too, something she hadn't expected. Connection. Not just gratitude or alliance, but something deeper. Something that felt almost like trust, like the beginning of friendship, or maybe something more. She didn't have a name for it yet, but she knew it was real. Kaelen, she murmured, half asleep now. Yes? I'm glad I found you, even if you did scare the hell out of me. Kaelen's voice held the faintest hint of warmth, something that might have been a smile if he'd had a face to smile with. I'm glad you found me too, Elara. She drifted off to sleep in his arms, her breathing slow and steady, her body finally warm, and Kaelen sat there in the darkness of the ice catacombs, holding her, feeling the weight of another living being against him for the first time in 300 years. It should have felt strange, foreign, wrong, but it didn't. It felt right, like something he'd been missing without knowing it, like a piece of himself he'd thought was lost forever, suddenly returned. He looked down at Elara's sleeping face, at the way her hair fell across her cheek, at the small smile on her lips. And for the first time in 3 centuries, Kaelen allowed himself to hope. Not for duty, not for redemption, but for something simpler, something human, for a future where he wasn't alone. Elara woke to the sound of dripping water. She opened her eyes slowly, her body warm and comfortable despite the frozen surroundings. She was still in the ice catacombs, still leaning against Kaelen, his armored form solid and unmoving beside her. "How long was I asleep?" she asked, her voice rough. 3 hours, perhaps 4. Time is difficult to measure here. Elara sat up, stretching carefully. Her arm still ached where the gargoyle had clipped her, but the wound had stopped bleeding, and the rest of her body felt good, rested, strong. "Thank you," she said, looking at Kaelen, "for keeping me warm, for keeping me alive." "It was necessary." "It was more than that," Elara said. "You didn't have to use your own energy. You could have just left me here." "No," Kaelen said firmly. "I could not." Elara smiled. "Yeah, I'm starting to figure that out about you." Kaelen stood and offered her his hand. She took it, and he pulled her to her feet with ease. His grip was still cold, but beneath the cold she could feel that warmth again, the heat of his soul burning quietly in the void. "Where to now?" she asked. "The Library of the Forgotten. It lies between here and the Sanctum. If we are fortunate, we may find information there. Maps, records, anything that might help us reach the Soul Altar safely. And if we're not fortunate, then we navigate blind and hope we do not fall into the abyss." "Great," Elara muttered. "No pressure." They left the alcove and continued through the catacombs, the ice walls glittering in the light of Elara's glow moss. The bodies in the alcoves watched them pass with frozen eyes, and Elara tried not to think about how many people had died here, how many lives had been sacrificed for a kingdom that no longer existed. After what felt like hours, the catacombs opened into a vast chamber, and there, carved into the far wall, was a doorway, massive, ornate, covered in runes that glowed with a faint blue light. "The library," Kaelen said. "Beyond this door lies knowledge and danger." "What kind of danger?" "The library is protected by wards, old wards, designed to keep intruders out and secrets in. If we are not careful, they will kill us." Elara studied the doorway, her mind racing. "Can you disable them?" "Perhaps, but it will take time." "Then let's get started." Kaelen approached the door and placed his gauntleted hand on its surface. The runes flared brighter, and Elara heard a low hum, like the sound of 1,000 voices whispering at once. Kaelen stood perfectly still, his head bowed, his hand pressed against the door. Minutes passed, then more. Elara watched, fascinated as the runes began to shift, their patterns changing, rearranging themselves under Kaelen's touch. Finally, with a sound like a sigh, the door swung open. "It is done, but be cautious. The wards are weakened, not destroyed. If we disturb the wrong thing, they will activate." "Noted," Elara said, and stepped through the doorway. The Library of the Forgotten was breathtaking. It was a cathedral of knowledge, shelves stretching up into darkness, filled with books and scrolls and tomes so old they seemed to crumble at a glance. The air smelled of parchment and dust and something else. Something sweet and cloying, like flowers left too long in a vase. Elara moved slowly through the aisles, her eyes wide. She'd never seen so many books in one place. Even the royal library in the capital couldn't compare to this. "What is all this?" she breathed. "History, magic, secrets." The scholars of the Old Kingdom collected knowledge from across the world and stored it here. They believed that information was power, that if they could understand everything, they could control everything. Did it work? No, the corruption came anyway, and all their knowledge could not stop it. Elara ran her fingers along the spines of the books, reading titles in languages she didn't recognize. Some of the books were bound in leather, others in metal. A few seemed to be bound in something that looked disturbingly like skin. She shuddered and moved on. At the center of the library was a reading area, tables and chairs all covered in dust, and a single desk that stood apart from the rest. On the desk was a book, open, as if someone had been reading it and simply walked away. Elara approached the desk, her curiosity overcoming her caution. She looked down at the open pages and froze. It was a journal, and the handwriting was elegant, precise, written in ink that had faded to brown. Day 1247 of the vigil. The corruption grows stronger. The wards are holding, but I do not know for how much longer. The king refuses to evacuate. He says we cannot abandon the Citadel, that to do so would be to admit defeat. But I fear we are already defeated. I fear that all we are doing now is delaying the inevitable. Elara's breath caught. She turned the page. Day 1251. The scholars have proposed a solution, a ritual. It would require a sacrifice, someone to bind their soul to the Citadel, to become a living ward against the corruption. The king has asked for volunteers. No one has stepped forward. I do not blame them. To give up one's body, one's life, one's very existence, it is too much to ask. Another page. Day 1253. I have volunteered. The king tried to refuse, but I convinced him. I am the strongest warrior in the kingdom. If anyone can withstand the ritual, it is me. And if I fail, at least I will have tried. At least I will have done something. Elara's hands trembled as she turned to the final entry. Day 1055. Tomorrow the ritual begins. I am afraid, not of death. I have faced death many times, but of what comes after. The scholars say I will lose my body, my senses, my humanity. I will become something else, something hollow. But if it means saving the kingdom, saving the people I have sworn to protect, then it is worth it. I only hope that when it is over, I will still remember why I did this. I hope I will still remember who I was. My name is Kaelen, and I will not let the darkness win. Elara's vision blurred with tears. She looked up and saw Kaelen standing a few feet away, his helmeted head turned toward the journal. This is yours, she said, her voice breaking. You wrote this. Yes. You knew what would happen. You knew you'd lose everything, and you did it anyway. It was my duty. It was more than duty, Elara's voice rose, echoing through the library. You sacrificed everything, your body, your life, your future, and for what? A kingdom that's been dead for 300 years, people who don't even remember your name? Kaelen was silent. Elara wiped her eyes angrily. You're not a weapon. You're not a tool. You're a person, a hero, and you deserve better than this. I am what I chose to become. No, Elara said fiercely. You're what they made you become, and I'm going to fix it. I'm going to find a way to give you back what you lost. I swear it. Kaelen stepped closer, his gauntleted hand reaching out, not to touch her, but to hover near her shoulder, as if he wanted to comfort her but didn't know how. Elara, you do not need to. Yes, I do, she interrupted. Because you saved me. You kept me alive. And because you're my friend. And I don't abandon my friends. Kaelen's hand lowered slowly. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. Friend, I have not had a friend in a very long time. Well, you have one now, Elara said, managing a shaky smile. So get used to it. Kaelen tilted his head, and she thought she saw the green light in his visor flicker, warmer, brighter. Thank you, Elara. She nodded and turned back to the journal, carefully closing it. Can I take this? I want to read the rest. I want to know your story. If you wish. Elara tucked the journal into her satchel, then looked around the library. Is there anything else here we need? Maps? Information about the soul altar? Kaelen moved to one of the shelves and pulled down a large, leather-bound tome. He opened it, his gauntleted fingers turning the pages with surprising delicacy. Here, the Sanctum of Echoes. The soul altar is at its heart, but the path is treacherous. There are guardians. What kind of guardians? The kind that do not die easily. Elara sighed. Of course there are. Kaelen closed the tome and tucked it under his arm. We should leave. The longer we remain here, the greater the risk of triggering the wards. Agreed. Let's... A sound cut her off, a low rumbling growl that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Elara's hand flew to her knife. What was that? Kaelen's posture shifted, his free hand moving to his sword. The wards. They have sensed us. We need to leave. Now. They ran. Behind them the growl grew louder, and Elara heard the sound of stone grinding against stone, of something massive moving through the library. They burst through the doorway and back into the ice catacombs, and Kaelen slammed the door shut behind them. The runes flared once, then went dark. Silence. Elara leaned against the wall, gasping for breath. What was that? A guardian. The library's final defense. If we had stayed any longer, it would have killed us. Great, Elara panted. Add it to the list of things trying to kill us. Kaelen looked down at the tome in his hand, then at Elara. We have what we need. The path to the soul altar is clear. We can proceed. Elara nodded, still catching her breath. Then let's go. The sooner we get there, the sooner we can end this. They left the catacombs behind and descended deeper into the Citadel, toward the Sanctum of Echoes, toward the soul altar, toward answers, and toward a confrontation that would change everything. The descent into the Sanctum of Echoes was different from the rest of the Citadel. Here, the walls were smooth, almost polished, and covered in carvings that seemed to move in the flickering light of Elara's glow moss. Faces twisted in agony, hands reaching out, bodies falling into darkness. It was a chronicle of suffering, etched into stone, and Elara couldn't look at it for long without feeling sick. The air was different too, thicker, heavier. Each breath felt like inhaling water, and the pressure in her ears made her dizzy. How much further? She asked, her voice sounding muffled. Kaelen consulted the tome they'd taken from the library, his finger tracing a faded map. Not far, the sanctum's entrance should be just ahead, but Elara. He paused, his helmeted head turning toward her. What lies beyond that entrance? It will be dangerous, more dangerous than anything we have faced so far. The Guardians you mentioned? Yes, they are called the Hollow Sentinels. They were once knights, like me, warriors who volunteered to protect the sanctum. But the ritual that bound them was imperfect. It drove them mad. Now they exist only to kill anything that enters their domain. Elara's grip tightened on her knife. How many? I do not know. The records are incomplete, but we must assume there are many. And they're all as strong as you? Kaelen was silent for a moment. Stronger. They have been here longer. The corruption has seeped into them, twisted them. They are no longer what they were. Elara felt her stomach clench. Can we avoid them? No. The only path to the soul altar goes through the sanctum. We must face them. Then we face them, Elara said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Together. Together, Kaelen echoed, and something in his voice, something warm, made Elara's chest tighten. They continued forward, and the corridor opened into a vast chamber, the Sanctum of Echoes. It was a cathedral carved into the living rock, its ceiling so high it disappeared into shadow. Massive pillars held up the darkness above, each one carved with the same twisted faces Elara had seen in the corridors, and in the center of the chamber, rising from the floor like a black tooth, was the soul altar. It was smaller than Elara had expected, just a stone platform, maybe 10 feet across, with a basin carved into its center. The basin glowed with a faint green light, the same color as the fire inside Kaelen's armor. "That's it?" Elara asked. "That's what we've been walking toward for days?" "Yes. The soul altar is the heart of the Citadel, the source of the binding. If we can reach it, we can renew the seals, or break them." "Or break them," Elara repeated. "You mean free you?" "Perhaps, but first we must—" A shriek cut him off. It came from everywhere at once, a sound like metal tearing, like 1,000 voices screaming in unison. Elara clapped her hands over her ears, but it didn't help. The sound burrowed into her skull, into her bones. Then they appeared, the hollow sentinels. They emerged from the shadows between the pillars, figures in armor that had once been silver but was now black with corruption. They moved wrong, their joints bending in ways joints shouldn't bend, their movements too fast, too fluid, like insects pretending to be human. And they had no faces, just smooth, blank helms with cracks that leaked green light. There were 6 of them. "Behind me," Kaelen commanded, drawing his greatsword. But Elara didn't move. She couldn't. She was frozen, staring at the sentinels, her mind screaming at her to run but her legs refusing to obey. One of the sentinels raised its sword, a blade as long as Kaelen's, its edge glowing with sickly light, and lunged. Kaelen met it head-on. The clash of their blades rang out like a bell, the sound echoing through the sanctum. Kaelen pushed the sentinel back, his movements precise and controlled, and followed up with a horizontal slash that would have cut a normal opponent in half. But the sentinel wasn't normal. It bent backward, impossibly far, and the blade whistled over its chest. Then it snapped forward like a spring and drove its sword toward Kaelen's exposed side. Kaelen twisted, bringing his own blade around to parry, and the 2 swords met again with a shower of sparks. The other 5 sentinels moved as one, circling around Kaelen, cutting off his escape. "Kaelen!" Elara shouted, finally breaking free of her paralysis. She ran forward, her knife raised, knowing it was useless but unable to just stand there and watch. One of the sentinels turned toward her, its blank helm tilting, and raised its sword. Kaelen roared, a sound that was more fury than voice, and moved with speed that shouldn't have been possible. He disengaged from the first sentinel, spun, and drove his shoulder into the one threatening Elara, sending it flying backward into a pillar. The impact cracked the stone. "Stay back," Kaelen shouted at her. "I will handle them." "There are 6 of them," Elara shouted back. "You can't—" The first sentinel recovered and attacked again, joined now by 2 others. They moved in perfect coordination, their blades weaving a net of steel that forced Kaelen back, step by step. He parried one strike, dodged another, but the third caught him across the shoulder, the corrupted blade biting deep into his armor. Green light, his soul, leaked from the wound like blood. "No!" Elara screamed. Kaelen staggered but didn't fall. He planted his feet, raised his sword, and swung with all his strength. The blade cut through the first sentinel's helm, cleaving it in 2. The creature collapsed, its body going limp, the green light fading from its cracks. 1 down, 5 to go. The remaining sentinels didn't hesitate. They pressed the attack, their movements faster now, more aggressive. They could sense weakness. They could taste victory. Kaelen fought with everything he had, his blade a blur of motion, but he was outnumbered. Another strike got through his guard, this one across his chest. More light leaked out. He was losing. Elara's mind raced. She couldn't fight them. Her knife would barely scratch their armor, but she had to do something. She couldn't just watch Kaelen die. Her eyes scanned the sanctum, looking for anything she could use. A weapon, a trap, anything. Then she saw it. One of the pillars, the one the sentinel had been thrown into, was cracked, badly, and above it, carved into the ceiling, was a support arch. If the pillar collapsed, the arch would come down with it, and it would fall right on top of the sentinels. Elara didn't think, she just moved. She ran to the pillar, pulled out her knife and began hacking at the crack, widening it, deepening it. The stone was old, weakened by centuries of corruption. It came apart under her blade like brittle bone. "Elara, what are you doing?" Kaelen's voice was strained, desperate. "Trust me," she shouted back. One of the sentinels noticed her. It broke away from the group and charged, its sword raised high. Elara kept hacking at the pillar, her hands shaking, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Almost there, almost. The pillar gave way. It collapsed with a sound like thunder, and the arch above it came down, a cascade of stone and rubble that crashed onto the sanctum floor. 3 of the sentinels were caught in the collapse. They went down under tons of rock, their bodies crushed, their green light extinguished. The charging sentinel stumbled, thrown off balance by the shock wave. Kaelen didn't waste the opening. He surged forward and drove his sword through the sentinel's chest, lifting it off the ground. The creature thrashed once, twice, then went still. Kaelen threw it aside and turned to face the last sentinel. It stood alone now, surrounded by the rubble of its fallen comrades. For a moment, it simply stared at Kaelen, its blank helm unreadable. Then it charged. Kaelen met it head-on, and their blades clashed again and again, a deadly dance of steel and fury. They moved across the sanctum floor, their strikes so fast Elara could barely follow them. Then Kaelen's foot caught on a piece of rubble. He stumbled, and the sentinel lunged, its blade aimed at his exposed neck. Elara screamed. Kaelen twisted, trying to bring his sword up to block, but he was too slow. The sentinel's blade struck his helm, and his helm flew off. It tumbled through the air, clattering across the stone floor, and came to rest near Elara's feet. Elara stared. Where Kaelen's head should have been, where his face, his features, his humanity should have been, there was nothing, just fire, green, ghostly fire, burning in the shape of a skull, no eyes, no mouth, no flesh, just flames, flickering and dancing in the darkness of his armor. He wasn't human. He wasn't even a ghost in the traditional sense. He was pure soul, pure will, pure energy, holding on to existence by sheer force of determination. The sentinel hesitated, as if confused by what it was seeing. Kaelen didn't hesitate. He brought his sword up in a devastating arc and cut the sentinel in half, from shoulder to hip. The creature fell, its light fading, and silence returned to the sanctum. Kaelen stood there, his chest heaving, or what passed for heaving when you had no lungs, and slowly turned toward Elara. His burning skull faced her, and she saw fear, not of her, but for her. Fear that she would run, that she would scream, that she would see him for what he truly was, a monster, and abandon him. Elara bent down and picked up his helmet. She walked across the sanctum, her steps slow and deliberate, her eyes never leaving his burning visage. She could feel the heat radiating from him, could smell the sharp metallic tang of magic in the air. When she reached him, she held out the helmet. "You drop this," she said quietly. Kaelen stared at her, his flames flickering with something that might have been surprise. You are not afraid?" "I'm terrified," Elara admitted. "But not of you. I'm afraid for you. Afraid of what you've been through. Afraid of what they did to you." She stepped closer, close enough that the heat from his soul made her skin prickle. "You're not a monster, Kaelen. You're a person who was forced to become something else. But you're still you. I see that. I've always seen it." Kaelen's flames flickered, brighter now, warmer, and slowly he reached out and took the helmet from her hands. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you, Elara." He placed the helmet back on his head, and the darkness of his visor returned, hiding the fire beneath. But Elara knew what was there now, and it didn't frighten her. It made her more determined than ever to free him. "Come on," she said, gesturing toward the soul altar. "Let's finish this." Kaelen nodded and followed her across the sanctum, stepping over the bodies of the fallen sentinels. Together they climbed the steps to the altar and stood before the glowing basin. The end was near. The soul altar hummed with power. Standing before it, Elara could feel the magic radiating from the basin. Not warm, not cold, but something else, something alive. It pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, as if the altar and she were somehow connected. Kaelen stood beside her, his hand resting on the altar's edge. The green light from the basin reflected off his armor, making him look like a statue carved from jade. "This is it," he said quietly. "The source of the binding, the heart of the Citadel." Elara peered into the basin. The light came from something inside, a crystal maybe, or a gem. It was hard to tell through the glow. "What do we do?" she asked. Kaelen pulled the tome from the library out of his armor and opened it, his fingers tracing the text. "To renew the seals, I must place my hand in the basin and speak the words of binding. The ritual will draw on my soul, strengthen the wards, and push the corruption back. The Citadel will be sealed for another 300 years. And you'll be trapped here again," Elara said. "Yes." "No." Elara shook her head firmly. "That's not an option. We're finding another way." "There is no other way." "There's always another way." Elara grabbed the tome from his hands and began flipping through it, scanning the pages desperately. There had to be something. Some loophole, some alternative, some... She stopped. Her eyes locked on a passage near the end of the book, and her breath caught in her throat. "The binding is sustained by the Heartstone, a gem of immense magical power, forged in the heart of a dying star. It is the anchor that holds the guardian's soul to the Citadel. Should the Heartstone be removed, the binding will break. The guardian will be freed, but the seals will fail, and the corruption will be unleashed." Elara's hands trembled as she read the next line. "The Heartstone is housed within the soul altar itself." She looked up at Kaelen, then down at the glowing basin. "The artifact," she whispered. "The thing I came here to find. The Heartstone." Kaelen tilted his head. "You seek the Heartstone?" "Yes, Elara's voice cracked. "I needed something valuable, something worth enough to buy my sister's freedom. The map I bought said there was an artifact hidden in the Citadel. I thought it was just treasure. I didn't know." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The Heartstone wasn't just treasure. It was Kaelen's life, his soul, the only thing keeping him tethered to this world. If she took it, he would die, and her sister would live. Kaelen was silent for a long moment. Then he stepped back from the altar and gestured toward the basin. "Take it." Elara stared at him. "What?" "Take the Heartstone. Save your sister." "Kaelen, no." "Elara." His voice was firm, but not unkind. "You came here for a reason. You have someone waiting for you, someone who needs you. I do not. Take the Heartstone. Leave this place. Let me fade." "I'm not doing that." Elara's voice rose, echoing through the sanctum. I'm not killing you to save her. There has to be another way." "There is no other way," Kaelen said, and his voice was so tired, so resigned that it broke Elara's heart. "I have been here for 300 years. I am not alive, Elara. I am a remnant, a ghost, an echo of something that once was. If my existence can buy your sister's life, then let it. Please." Elara felt tears burning in her eyes. "You don't get to do that. You don't get to sacrifice yourself just because you think you're not worth saving." "I am not worth—" "Yes, you are," Elara shouted. "You're worth everything. You gave up your life to save a kingdom. You've been holding back the corruption for 3 centuries. You saved me, multiple times. You're a hero, Kaelen. And heroes don't get to throw their lives away just because they're tired." Kaelen's shoulders slumped. "I am not a hero. I am a failure. I failed to save the kingdom. I failed to protect the people I swore to defend. All I have done is delay the inevitable. If I can do one good thing, one truly good thing before I fade, let it be this. Let me save your sister." Elara wiped her eyes angrily. "What about you? Who saves you?" "No one," Kaelen said simply. "That is my fate, and I have accepted it." "Well, I haven't." Elara stepped closer to him, her hands clenched into fists. "I made you a promise, remember? I promised I'd find a way to free you, and I keep my promises." "Elara." "No, you listen to me." Her voice shook with emotion. "I've lost people. My parents died when I was young. My sister is all I have left, and I came here ready to do anything, steal, fight, kill, to save her. But I won't kill you. I can't, because you're not just some cursed knight anymore. You're my friend, and I don't abandon my friends." Kaelen was silent, his helmeted head bowed. Elara took a breath, trying to steady herself. "There has to be another way, some way to use the Heartstone without killing you, some way to break your curse without unleashing the corruption. If such a way exists, I do not know it." "Then we'll figure it out," Elara said, "together, like we've done everything else." She turned back to the tome, flipping through the pages again, reading every word, searching for anything, any clue, any hint that might help. And then she found it. A single line scrawled in the margin in handwriting different from the rest of the text, older, shakier. "The Heartstone binds, but it can also break. Use its power not to seal, but to sever. Free the soul. End the curse. Let the guardian rest." Elara's heart pounded. "Kaelen, look at this." Kaelen leaned over her shoulder, reading the passage. "Sever the binding. Use the Heartstone's power to break the curse instead of maintaining it." Exactly! Elara felt hope surge through her. "We don't take the Heartstone. We use it. We use its power to free you from the curse, to give you back your life. But if the binding is broken, the seals will fail. The corruption will be your problem," a new voice said. Elara and Kaelen spun around. Standing at the entrance to the sanctum, wreathed in shadow, was a figure. Tall, thin, wrapped in robes that seemed to be made of darkness itself. And behind the figure, rising from the floor like smoke, were shapes. Dozens of them. Hundreds. The corruption, given form. "Who are you?" Kaelen demanded, his hand going to his sword. The figure laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "I am the herald of the abyss, the voice of the darkness you thought you had sealed away. And I have been waiting, Hollow Knight, waiting for someone foolish enough to disturb the altar, to weaken the seals just enough for me to break through." Elara felt ice flood her veins. "We didn't—" "Oh, but you did," the herald said, stepping forward. The shadows moved with him, writhing like living things. "The moment you entered the sanctum, you cracked the seal, and now it's too late to stop what's coming. The abyss will consume this place, and then it will consume the world. Kaelen raised his sword, placing himself between Elara and the herald. "You will not pass." "I don't need to pass," the herald said. "I'm already here." The shadows surged forward like a tidal wave, and the battle for the Citadel, for the world, began. The shadows moved like a living storm. They poured into the sanctum, flowing over the rubble and broken pillars, spreading across the floor like spilled ink. And within the darkness, Elara could see shapes, twisted, wrong shapes that screamed and gibbered and reached with too many arms. "Get to the altar," Kaelen shouted, his sword already in motion. He met the first wave of shadows head-on, his blade cutting through them like they were made of smoke. But for every shadow he destroyed, 2 more took its place. Elara ran, her boots slipping on the stone as she scrambled up the altar's steps. Her mind raced. The herald had said they'd cracked the seal just by entering, which meant the corruption was already breaking free, which meant they had minutes, maybe less, before the abyss consumed everything. She reached the basin and stared down at the heartstone. It was beautiful, a crystalline gem the size of her fist, pulsing with that eerie green light. It sat in the center of the basin, suspended in the air by threads of magic so fine they were almost invisible. This was it. This was what she'd come for, the treasure that would save Mira. But if she took it, Kaelen would die. And if she didn't use it to free him, he'd be trapped here forever, fighting an endless battle against the darkness. "Damn it," Elara whispered, her hands hovering over the heartstone. "Damn it, damn it, damn it!" Behind her, Kaelen fought like a man possessed. His sword was a blur of motion, each strike precise and devastating. But the shadows were endless. They climbed over each other, forming waves that crashed against him again and again. And slowly, inevitably, they were pushing him back, toward the altar, toward Elara. The herald stood at the sanctum's entrance, watching with amusement. Beautiful, isn't it? The dance of the doomed, the hollow night fighting until the very end. Such loyalty, such devotion, such waste. Kaelen didn't respond. He couldn't afford to. Every ounce of his concentration was focused on the battle, on keeping the shadows away from Elara. But Elara could see the cracks forming in his armor, literal cracks, where the shadows had struck him. Green light leaked from the wounds, growing brighter with each hit. He was losing cohesion. His soul was being torn apart. He was dying. "No," Elara said. Her hands closed around the heartstone, and it was warm to the touch, almost hot. Power thrummed through it, raw and ancient. Not like this. She lifted the heartstone from the basin. The moment it left its resting place, the entire citadel screamed. It wasn't a sound. It was a feeling, a wave of agony and rage that slammed into Elara's mind like a physical blow. She gasped, nearly dropping the stone, but forced herself to hold on. The seals weren't just cracking now, they were shattering. Kaelen staggered, his sword dipping. "Elara, what did you—" "Trust me," she shouted over the roar of the collapsing seals. "Just trust me." She looked down at the heartstone, at the power pulsing within it, and remembered the words from the tome. Use its power not to seal, but to sever, free the soul, end the curse. But how? How did you use a magical artifact you didn't understand, had never trained with, and had no idea how to control? The answer came to her in a flash of desperate inspiration. The same way you did anything when you had no idea what you were doing. You improvised. Elara closed her eyes and focused on the heartstone, on the power within it. She thought of Kaelen, of his voice, his presence, the warmth of his soul. She thought of the bond they'd formed, the promise she'd made. Free him, she thought. Break the curse. Let him go. The heartstone grew hotter in her hands. The light intensified, shifting from green to white, so bright it hurt to look at even through closed eyelids. And then it shattered. Not physically, but the magic within it, the binding, the curse, the chains that had held Kaelen for 300 years, broke apart like glass struck by a hammer. Kaelen screamed. It was a sound of agony and release, of pain and relief, of something being torn away and something else rushing in to fill the void. He dropped to his knees, his sword clattering to the ground, his hands clutching at his helm. The green light pouring from his wounds turned white, brilliant, blazing white. It filled the sanctum, pushing back the shadows, forcing the herald to raise an arm to shield his eyes. "What have you done?" the herald shrieked. Elara opened her eyes, squinting against the light. "I freed him." The light grew brighter still, and Kaelen's armor began to crack, not breaking, changing. The black metal turned silver, then white, then transparent. And within the armor the fire of his soul burned with such intensity it was like staring into the sun. Then, with a sound like thunder, the armor exploded. Fragments of metal flew in every direction, embedding themselves in the walls, the floor, the ceiling. Elara threw herself to the ground, covering her head as the shock wave rolled over her. When she looked up, the light had faded, and Kaelen was gone. No, not gone. Changed. Where the armored knight had knelt, there was now something else. A figure made of pure light. Humanoid but not human, its edges blurred and shifting. It had no face, no features, just a vaguely man-shaped form that pulsed with power. The herald stared, and for the first time Elara saw something like fear in his posture. Impossible. The curse was absolute. The binding cannot be broken. The light figure turned toward the herald, and when it spoke, its voice was Kaelen's, but transformed, layered with harmonics, echoing with power. "You are wrong." The figure raised one hand, and a blade of pure light materialized in its grasp, a sword shaped from the same energy that formed its body. It pointed the blade at the herald. "The curse is broken. The binding is severed. I am free, and you—" The blade blazed brighter. "Are finished." The herald laughed, but it was a shrill, desperate sound. "You think you've won? You think freeing yourself changes anything? The seals are broken. The abyss is awake. Even if you destroy me, the corruption will spread. You've doomed the world to save one cursed soul." Elara's stomach clenched. The herald was right. The seals were gone. The corruption was free. They'd traded Kaelen's freedom for the world's destruction. But Kaelen, or the being he'd become, didn't waver. "Then I will stop it." "You can't," the herald spat. "The abyss is infinite. It cannot be destroyed, cannot be contained. You're just one soul. What can you possibly—" "I can do what I should have done 300 years ago," Kaelen said. "Not seal the corruption, but destroy it, burn it away, all of it, even if it means burning myself out in the process." "Kaelen, no!" Elara scrambled to her feet. "You just got free. You can't—" "I can, and I must." The light figure turned toward her, and though it had no face, Elara felt its gaze, warm, sad, but resolute. "This is my choice, Elara. Not a curse, not a duty. My choice. I will not let the abyss take the world. I will not let it hurt the people I failed to protect 300 years ago, and I will not let it hurt you." Tears streamed down Elara's face. "There has to be another way. We just freed you. You deserve to live." "I have lived. For 300 years I have existed, but I have not been alive, not truly, not until I met you." The figure moved closer, and Elara felt warmth radiating from it, real warmth, not the cold burn of his armored form. You gave me something I thought I had lost forever: hope, friendship, purpose, and for that I am grateful. Don't do this, Elara whispered. Please, don't leave me. I am not leaving you, Kaelen said gently. I am saving you. There is a difference. He turned away from her, facing the herald and the tide of shadows that had begun to advance again. The light around him intensified, growing brighter and brighter until it was almost painful to look at. Herald of the Abyss, Kaelen said, his voice ringing through the sanctum like a bell. You said the abyss is infinite. You said it cannot be destroyed. You are half right. It cannot be destroyed from the outside, but from within? He raised his light sword. From within, even infinity can burn. The herald's eyes widened. You wouldn't. You'd be consumed, destroyed utterly. There would be nothing left of you, not even a ghost. I know. Then why? Kaelen's form pulsed, and Elara heard something in his voice that sounded almost like a smile. Because it is the right thing to do. Because I am tired of being alone in the dark, and because she asked me to be brave. He glanced back at Elara one last time. Thank you, Elara, for everything, for seeing me, for believing in me, for giving me a reason to hope again. I will not forget you, not in this life, or the next, or whatever comes after. Kaelen. Elara reached out, but he was already moving. He launched himself at the herald, his light sword blazing, and the two collided in an explosion of brightness and shadow. The herald shrieked, trying to pull back, but Kaelen didn't let go. He wrapped himself around the herald, his light burning into the darkness, consuming it. The shadows screamed and tried to pull their master free, but Kaelen's light spread, flowing out from him like water, like fire, like a wave of purifying energy that washed over the corruption. Everywhere it touched, the shadows dissolved. The twisted shapes within the darkness burned away. The herald's form began to disintegrate, his screams growing fainter and fainter. No! I am eternal. I cannot be. The light reached the herald's core, and he vanished in a flash of brilliance. But the corruption remained. The abyss itself, vast and hungry, still pressed against the sanctum, still threatened to break through. Kaelen turned toward it. Elara, he said, his voice already growing fainter. When this is over, live for both of us. Be happy. Find your sister. Save her. And remember, you are stronger than you know. Kaelen, don't! Elara was running now, racing down the altar steps. But she was too far away, too slow. Kaelen raised both arms, and his form began to expand. The light that made up his being spread outward, growing larger, brighter, hotter. It filled the sanctum, spilled out into the corridors beyond, reached down into the depths where the corruption festered, and then he dove into the abyss. The light and the darkness collided, and the world turned white. The explosion threw Elara backward. She hit the ground hard. The air knocked from her lungs. Her vision filled with nothing but white light. For a moment, she couldn't see, couldn't hear, couldn't think. There was only the light and the heat and the overwhelming sense that something fundamental had just been torn from the fabric of reality. Then, slowly, the world came back. Elara pushed herself up on trembling arms, gasping for breath. The sanctum was different. The shadows were gone. The corruption that had coated the walls, the floor, the very air, it was gone, burned away. But so was Kaelen. No, Elara whispered, her voice raw. She staggered to her feet, looking around wildly. No, 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 Kaelen. There was no answer. Just silence. The sanctum felt empty. Not the oppressive emptiness of a place abandoned, but the peaceful emptiness of a place cleansed. Elara ran to where Kaelen had been, where he dove into the abyss. The floor there was cracked, scorched, but there was no body, no armor, no trace that he'd ever existed, except for one thing. A single fragment of his armor, a piece of the breastplate about the size of her palm, lay on the ground, glowing faintly. Elara picked it up with shaking hands, and it was warm to the touch. Not the cold of metal, not the burning heat of his soul, just warm, comforting, like a promise kept. "You idiot," Elara choked out, tears streaming down her face. "You brave, stupid, selfless idiot. I told you not to leave me." She clutched the fragment to her chest and sank to her knees, grief crashing over her in waves. He was gone, really, truly gone, not sealed away, not sleeping, just gone, and the world was safe because of it. But Elara didn't care about the world. Not in this moment. She cared about the hollow knight who'd saved her life, who'd carried her through the cold, who'd trusted her when he had no reason to. She cared about her friend. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry I couldn't save you. I tried so hard, but it wasn't enough." The fragment in her hands pulsed once, gently, like a heartbeat. Elara looked down at it, her tears blurring her vision. For a moment, she thought she saw something within the metal, a flicker of green light, but when she blinked, it was gone. Just my imagination, she thought, just wishful thinking. She stayed there for a long time, kneeling on the scorched floor, holding the fragment of armor, letting herself grieve. The citadel was silent around her, no longer groaning or shifting or threatening. It was at peace, finally. But Elara wasn't. Eventually, exhaustion forced her to move. She couldn't stay here forever. She had to find a way out, had to get back to Mira. "Live," Kaelen had said. "Live for both of us." Elara pushed herself to her feet, tucking the armor fragment into her satchel. She turned toward the sanctum's entrance, ready to begin the long climb back to the surface, and stopped. The Heartstone, or what was left of it. The basin at the center of the altar still glowed, but the light was different now, softer, more golden than green, and within the basin, where the Heartstone had been, there was now something else. A seed. Elara approached slowly, her brow furrowed. It was definitely a seed, about the size of an acorn, with a smooth crystalline surface that caught the light. It pulsed with the same gentle rhythm as the armor fragment in her satchel. She reached out and picked it up, and the moment her fingers closed around it, warmth spread through her hand, up her arm, into her chest. And she heard a voice, not spoken aloud, not even in her mind exactly, but felt somehow in the core of her being. Not gone, changed, sleeping, waiting. Elara's breath caught. "Kaelen?" The voice didn't respond, but the seed pulsed again, and Elara understood. He wasn't dead, not completely. The light that had been his soul, the energy that had burned away the corruption, it hadn't been destroyed. It had been transformed, condensed, contained within this tiny seed. He was dormant, resting, recovering from the immense power he'd expended. But he could return. "How?" Elara whispered, staring at the seed. "How do I bring you back?" No answer, just that gentle pulse. Elara closed her hand around the seed and pressed it to her heart. "I'll figure it out. I don't know how or how long it will take, but I'll figure it out. I promise." She turned and walked toward the exit, her steps more steady now. She had a purpose again, a goal. She would find a way to restore Kaelen, and she would save Mira. She would do both, or die trying. The climb out of the Citadel took hours, maybe days. Time still moved strangely in the depths, and Elara had lost all sense of it. but eventually she emerged into the throne room where this had all begun. It looked different now, cleaner. The oppressive weight that had hung over the Citadel was gone, replaced by a stillness that felt almost sacred. The moonlight streaming through the shattered ceiling seemed brighter, more pure. Elara crossed the throne room and climbed the stairs to the Hall of Shields. The bodies were still there, the skeletons of the fallen, but they seemed peaceful now, as if they could finally rest. "He did it," Elara said to them. "Kaelen, he stopped the corruption. You can rest now." She continued on, through the corridors, past the traps that no longer activated, up the stairs to the surface, and finally, she stepped out into the winter night. The air was cold and crisp, the stars overhead brilliant. Snow had begun to fall, soft, gentle flakes that melted on her skin. Elara took a deep breath, filling her lungs with clean air for the first time in what felt like an eternity. She was alive. She'd survived, but Kaelen hadn't, not in the way that mattered. She reached into her satchel and pulled out the seed, holding it up to the moonlight. It glowed softly, a tiny star cradled in her palm. "I'll find a way," she said again. "I swear it. I don't care how long it takes or what I have to do. I'll bring you back." The seed pulsed, and Elara thought she felt something. Approval, maybe, or gratitude. She tucked it carefully back into her satchel, along with the armor fragment, and started walking. The village where the slavers held Mira was 3 days' journey from here. She had no food, no water, no supplies beyond the clothes on her back and a knife she'd borrowed from a ghost. But she'd survived the Citadel. She'd fought monsters and corruption and her own fears. A 3-day walk was nothing compared to that. Elara smiled, small and tired, but real, and kept walking. Behind her, the Citadel stood silent against the night sky. No longer a tomb, no longer a prison, just a monument to a hero who'd given everything to save the world, and to a thief who'd promised to save him in return. The journey was hard. Elara had to forage for food, melt snow for water, and sleep in caves and under trees to avoid freezing. Her body ached. Her arm throbbed where the gargoyle had wounded her, and exhaustion dogged her every step, but she kept going, for Mira, for Kaelen, for herself. On the 3rd day, she crested a hill and saw the village below, a cluster of buildings huddled against the cold, smoke rising from chimneys. And on the outskirts, a large wooden structure that could only be the slavers' compound. Elara's jaw tightened. She was out of time. Mira's deadline had passed. The slavers would have already sold her, or worse, unless Elara could pay them. Now, she reached into her satchel, past the seed and the armor fragment, and pulled out the last thing she'd taken from the Citadel. A small gemstone, not the heartstone, that was gone, transformed into the seed, but another gem, one she'd found in the library. It was valuable, she thought. Maybe valuable enough. It had to be. Elara descended the hill and walked into the village, heading straight for the compound. The guards at the gate tried to stop her, but she pushed past them, her eyes blazing with determination. "I'm here for Mira," she said. "I'm here to pay her ransom." The head slaver, a scarred man with cold eyes, looked her up and down, then laughed. "You're 3 days late, girl. The debt's doubled, and even if it hadn't, you look like you've got nothing." Elara slammed the gemstone down on his desk. "Will this cover it?" The slaver picked up the gem, examining it in the firelight. His eyes widened slightly, and Elara knew she'd been right. It was valuable, very valuable. "This might work," the slaver said slowly. "Where'd you get it? Does it matter?" The slaver studied her for a moment, then shrugged. "I suppose not." He snapped his fingers, and one of his men disappeared into the back of the compound. Minutes later, the man returned, dragging a small figure behind him. Mira. She was thin, pale, and her clothes were dirty, but she was alive. And when she saw Elara, her eyes widened with disbelief. "Elara," her voice was hoarse. "Is it really you?" Elara ran forward and pulled her sister into her arms, holding her tight. "It's me. I'm here. You're safe now." Mira clung to her, sobbing. I thought you weren't coming back." "I always come back," Elara said, her own voice breaking. "Always." The slaver cleared his throat. "Touching. Now get out before I change my mind." Elara didn't need to be told twice. She took Mira's hand and led her out of the compound, out of the village, onto the road beyond. They walked in silence for a while, Mira still too overwhelmed to speak. Finally, as the village disappeared behind them, she looked up at her sister. "Where did you go?" she asked quietly. "What happened to you?" Elara thought of the Citadel, of Kaelen, of the battle and the sacrifice and the seed that now rested in her satchel. "I made a promise to someone," she said, "and I'm going to keep it. But first, we need to find somewhere safe, somewhere we can rest." "And then?" Elara pulled out the seed, showing it to Mira. It glowed softly in her palm, pulsing with that gentle, steady rhythm. "And then," Elara said, "I'm going to bring a friend back, no matter what it takes." Mira looked at the seed, then at her sister, and slowly nodded. "Okay, then I'll help you." Elara smiled and tucked the seed away. "Thank you." They walked on into the winter night, two sisters reunited, carrying between them the soul of a hero. And somewhere, in the space between light and dark, between life and death, Kaelen slept, waiting. 6 months had passed since Elara left the Citadel. 6 months of searching, 6 months of traveling from village to village, city to city, seeking anyone who might know how to restore a soul trapped in a seed. She'd consulted hedge witches and court mages, scholars and priests, anyone who claimed to understand the old magic. Most had laughed at her. Some had tried to steal the seed. A few had tried to help, but their rituals failed. Their spells fizzled. Their knowledge proved insufficient. The seed remained dormant. Kaelen remained silent. But Elara didn't give up. She and Mira had found work in a small coastal town. Elara as a guard, Mira as a seamstress. It wasn't much, but it was honest work, and it gave them enough coin to keep searching. Every week, Elara would take her earnings and buy another book, another scroll, another consultation with someone who might have answers. And every night, she would hold the seed and whisper to it, "I haven't forgotten you. I'm still looking. I'll find a way." The seed never responded, but sometimes, just sometimes, Elara thought she felt it pulse a little stronger, as if acknowledging her words. Then, one evening, everything changed. Elara was walking home from the market, her arms full of supplies, when she felt it. A tremor in the air. A shift in the world that made her skin prickle and her breath catch. She dropped the supplies and ran. By the time she reached the small room she shared with Mira, the tremor had become a quake. The walls shook, the floor buckled, and from somewhere deep beneath the town, she heard a sound that made her blood run cold, a roar, vast and terrible and hungry. "No," Elara whispered. "No, it can't be." But she knew what it was. She'd heard that sound before, in the depths of the Citadel, the abyss. It had returned. Mira was waiting for her when she burst through the door, her face pale. "Elara, what's happening? The whole town is shaking." "We need to leave," Elara said, grabbing her pack and stuffing their belongings into it. "Now, the corruption, it's back." "But you said Kaelen destroyed it." "He did." Elara's hands shook as she tied the pack closed. "He burned it away. But the abyss, it's not just corruption. It's a wound in the world, a tear in reality. Kaelen sealed it by sacrificing himself, but seals can break, and this one just did. As if to punctuate her words, the floor cracked, and black ichor began seeping through the wood. Mira screamed and jumped back. "What is that?" "The abyss," Elara said grimly. She pulled out the seed from her satchel and stared at it. It was glowing brighter than she'd ever seen it, pulsing rapidly, almost frantically. And then, for the first time in 6 months, she heard his voice. "Elara!" She gasped. "Kaelen? Kaelen, is that you?" "The abyss has broken free. My sacrifice was not enough. It only delayed the inevitable." "Then we'll stop it again," Elara said desperately. "Tell me what to do. Tell me how to bring you back." "You cannot. I am too weak. The seed contains only a fragment of what I was. It is not enough to fight the abyss." "Then what do we do?" Elara's voice cracked. "I didn't save you just to watch the world end." There was a pause. Then Kaelen's voice came again, quieter now. Sad. "There is one way, but it requires a sacrifice, a life freely given to fuel the seed, to restore me fully, to give me the strength to face the abyss one final time." Elara's stomach dropped. "A life? Whose life?" "Anyone's, but it must be willing. The magic will not accept a forced sacrifice." Elara looked at Mira, who was staring at the spreading corruption with wide, terrified eyes. Then she looked down at the seed in her hand. "No," she said. "There has to be another way." "There is not. I am sorry, Elara. I am so sorry. But if we do nothing, the abyss will consume this town, then the next, then the world. Everything I died to protect will be lost." Elara's mind raced. A willing sacrifice, a life freely given. She thought of all the people in this town, the merchants who'd been kind to her, the children who played in the streets, the families trying to survive. She thought of Mira, who'd already suffered so much, who deserved a chance to live, to be happy, to be free. And she thought of Kaelen, the hollow knight who'd given up everything to save the world, who'd been alone for 300 years, who'd finally found peace only to be called back to fight again. The choice was obvious. "Take me," Elara said. "What?" "Take my life. Use it to restore yourself. Save the world." "Elara, no." "Yes!" Her voice was firm, steady, despite the fear clawing at her chest. "You said it has to be willing. I'm willing. I choose this." "Elara, what are you saying?" Mira grabbed her arm. "You can't." "I can," Elara said, turning to her sister. "Mira, listen to me. Kaelen is a hero. He saved the world once already. He can do it again, but he needs strength, and I can give him that." "By dying?" Tears streamed down Mira's face. "No, I won't let you. We just found each other again." "I know." Elara pulled her sister into a tight hug. "I know, and I'm so sorry, but this is the only way. If I don't do this, we all die anyway. At least this way, you get to live. You get to be free." "I don't want to be free without you." Mira sobbed into her shoulder. Elara held her tighter, her own tears falling now. "You're strong, Mira, stronger than you know. You'll survive this. You'll build a life. You'll be happy. Promise me you'll be happy." Mira couldn't speak. She just clung to Elara, shaking with sobs. Elara gently pulled away and pressed something into Mira's hand. The fragment of Kaelen's armor she'd carried since the Citadel. "Keep this," she said. "Remember me, and remember him. Remember that we fought for something that mattered." She turned back to the seed, which was now blazing with light. "Elara, please, do not do this. I am not worth—" "Yes, you are," Elara said firmly. "You're worth everything. You taught me that. Now let me return the favor." She took a deep breath and closed her hand around the seed. I, Elara, freely give my life to restore Kaelen, guardian of the Citadel. Use my strength. Use my soul. Save the world. The seed flared, and the world turned white. Pain, not physical pain. Elara's body was gone, consumed by the magic, but a different kind of pain. The pain of being unmade, of feeling yourself dissolve, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but light and will. She could feel Kaelen beside her, or within her, or around her. The boundaries between them had blurred. She could feel his grief, his rage at what she'd done, his desperate attempt to stop the magic and save her. But it was too late. The sacrifice had been accepted. It's okay, she tried to tell him. This is my choice. Let me do this. Let me save you the way you saved me. She felt his resistance crumble, felt his acceptance bitter and painful as it was. And then she felt something else, warmth, not the burning heat of magic, but the gentle warmth of gratitude, of love. Thank you. Kaelen's voice whispered through the light. Thank you, Elara. I will not waste this gift, I swear it. I know, Elara thought. Now go, fight, win. The light intensified, and Elara felt herself fading, not into darkness, but into something else, something vast and peaceful and eternal. She thought of Mira one last time. Be happy, please be happy. And then she was gone. Mira watched through tear-blurred eyes as her sister's body collapsed, the seed falling from her lifeless hand. No. She lunged forward, but before she could reach Elara, the seed exploded. Light filled the room, brilliant, blazing light that pushed back the corruption, that burned away the ichor seeping through the floor. And from the light a figure emerged, Kaelen, but not as he had been. Not hollow, not armored, not a ghost. He was solid, real, flesh and blood and bone. He stood tall, his body lean and muscular, his skin pale from centuries without sunlight. His hair was dark, falling to his shoulders, and his eyes were the same green as the fire that had burned within his armor. But they were human eyes now, alive, real. He looked down at his hands, flexing his fingers, feeling the sensation of movement, of touch, of being for the first time in 300 years. Then he saw Elara's body. No, he breathed, dropping to his knees beside her. He gathered her into his arms, cradling her against his chest. No, Elara, what have you done? What have you done? Mira crawled over, her hands shaking. Bring her back. You have magic. You have power. Bring her back. Kaelen's face twisted with anguish. I cannot. The sacrifice is absolute. Her life is gone. Her soul is scattered. I cannot. A tremor shook the building, and the roar of the abyss grew louder. Kaelen looked up, his jaw tightening. He gently laid Elara's body down and stood, his hands clenching into fists. She gave her life to save the world, he said, his voice hard. I will not let that sacrifice be in vain. He turned toward the door, toward the spreading corruption, and his eyes blazed with green fire. Mira, he said, take your sister's body. Get as far from here as you can. Do not look back. What are you going to do? Mira asked, though she already knew. Kaelen's expression was grim. What I should have done 300 years ago. Not seal the abyss. Destroy it. Completely. Even if it means destroying myself in the process. But you just came back. You just became human again. And I will use this humanity for something that matters. Kaelen looked back at Elara's body one last time, his expression softening. She believed in me. She saved me. Now I will honor that belief. I will finish what we started. He walked out into the street where the corruption had spread, where the abyss was tearing through reality itself. The townspeople were fleeing, screaming, but Kaelen walked calmly toward the center of the chaos, toward the tear in the world. Mira watched from the doorway, clutching Elara's body, tears streaming down her face. And Kaelen, the guardian, the hollow knight made flesh, raised his hands and called upon every ounce of power Elara had given him. His body began to glow, not with the cold light of his soul form, but with warm, golden light. Human light, life light. He was burning himself up, using his restored life as fuel for one final, devastating attack. For Elara, he said quietly, for the world, for everyone who believed in me. And then he unleashed everything. The light exploded outward, a wave of pure, cleansing energy that washed over the corruption, over the abyss, over the tear in reality. Everywhere it touched, the darkness burned away. The ichor evaporated. The roar of the abyss became a scream, then a whimper, then silence. The tear sealed. The corruption vanished. The world was saved. And at the center of the blast where Kaelen had stood, there was nothing. Just light, fading slowly into the dawn. The sun rose over the coastal town, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Mira sat in the ruins of what had been their home, Elara's body wrapped in a blanket beside her. She'd been sitting there all night, numb with grief, unable to process what had happened. Her sister was dead. The hero who'd saved them was gone, and she was alone. Again. The townspeople were beginning to emerge from their hiding places, looking around in confusion and relief. The corruption was gone. The danger had passed. They'd survived. But Mira didn't feel like celebrating. She stood slowly, her body aching, and prepared to carry Elara's body to somewhere. She didn't know where. A grave, maybe. A pyre. Somewhere her sister could rest. Then she heard a sound. A cough, weak and rasping. Mira's head snapped around, her heart leaping into her throat. There, in the center of the street where Kaelen had made his final stand, something moved. Mira ran. She skidded to a halt and stared down at the figure lying in the rubble. It was a man. Young, maybe 30, though it was hard to tell. His body was covered in burns and cuts, his clothes scorched to tatters. But he was breathing, alive, and his eyes, when they fluttered open, were green. "Kaelen?" Mira whispered. The man's gaze focused on her slowly, and he managed a weak smile. "Mira, you're safe. You're alive!" She dropped to her knees beside him. "How? You burned yourself up. You should be dead," Kaelen finished, his voice hoarse. "I should be. But—" He raised one trembling hand and looked at it. "I am not. I am mortal, human, flesh and blood." He tried to sit up and immediately gasped in pain, clutching his side. Mira saw blood seeping through his fingers. "Don't move," she said. "You're hurt." "I can feel it," Kaelen said, and there was wonder in his voice. The pain, the cold, the warmth of the sun. He looked up at the sky, at the golden light streaming down, and tears filled his eyes. "I can feel everything." Mira didn't understand. But how? The sacrifice was not complete, Kaelen said. Elara gave her life to restore me, to give me strength, but she also gave me something else, something I did not expect. He pressed his hand to his chest, over his heart. She gave me her humanity, her life force. When I burned myself to destroy the abyss, I should have been consumed entirely. But her gift, it anchored me. It kept me tethered to this world. It made me real. "So you're actually human now? Not a ghost, not a spirit?" "Yes." Kaelen's smile was bittersweet. "I am human, mortal, fragile. I will age, I will sicken, I will die someday. but I will live first, truly live, because of her. Mira's eyes filled with tears again. She'd be happy about that. She wanted you to be free. I know. Kaelen's expression crumpled. And I will spend every day of this life honoring her sacrifice, I swear it. Mira helped him to his feet, supporting his weight as he swayed. Can you walk? I think so. He took a tentative step, then another. His legs shook, but they held. It is strange, walking, feeling the ground beneath my feet. I have not done this in 300 years. They made their way slowly back to where Elara's body lay. Kaelen's breath caught when he saw her, and he sank down beside her, his hand reaching out to touch her face. I am sorry, he whispered. I am so sorry, Elara. You should be here. You should be the one feeling the sun, tasting the air, living this life. Not me. He bowed his head, and his shoulders shook with silent sobs. Mira knelt beside him and placed a hand on his shoulder. She chose this. She wanted you to live. Don't waste that gift by drowning in guilt. Kaelen looked up at her, his eyes red. How can I not? She gave everything for me. A stranger, a ghost, someone who had already lived and died and should have stayed dead. You weren't a stranger to her, Mira said gently. She told me about you, about the journey, about how you saved her life, kept her warm, fought beside her. You were her friend, and she didn't save a ghost. She saved a hero. Kaelen was silent for a long moment. Then he reached into the rubble beside him and pulled out something small and glowing. The seed. It was cracked now, its light dim, but it still pulsed with a faint rhythm. She is not entirely gone, Kaelen said quietly. Her soul, a fragment of it, remains, bound to the seed just as mine was. It is not enough to restore her, not yet, but it is hope. Mira's breath caught. You mean? I mean that if I can find a way, if I can learn enough, search long enough, grow strong enough, I might be able to bring her back, as she brought me back. Kaelen closed his hand around the seed. It will take time, years perhaps, maybe decades, but I have time now. I have a lifetime. He looked at Mira. Will you help me? Will you help me find a way to save your sister? Mira didn't hesitate. Yes, whatever it takes, however long it takes, we'll bring her back. Kaelen nodded and carefully tucked the seed into his pocket. Then he stood, offering Mira his hand. She took it, and together they lifted Elara's body. We will give her a proper rest, Kaelen said, and then we will begin. We will search the world for answers. We will learn everything there is to know about soul magic, about life and death and the spaces between, and we will not stop until she is restored. Promise? Mira asked. I promise, Kaelen said. On my life, my real mortal human life, I promise. Life. They carried Elara to a hill overlooking the sea, where the grass was green and the view was beautiful. They buried her there, marking the grave with a simple stone. Kaelen stood over the grave for a long time, his hand resting on the stone, feeling its rough texture beneath his palm. Thank you, he said softly, for everything, for seeing me, for believing in me, for giving me this chance. I will not waste it. I will live. I will fight. I will search, and I will bring you back. I swear it on the warmth of the sun, on the cold of the snow, on every sensation you gave me the chance to feel. He knelt and pressed his forehead to the stone. Wait for me, Elara. I am coming. However long it takes, I am coming. Mira stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder, and together they watched the sun climb higher into the sky. The world was safe. The abyss was destroyed. The corruption was gone. But their journey was not over. It was only beginning. 5 years later, Kaelen stood in the doorway of a small cottage, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. His hair was longer now, tied back, and his face bore the lines of someone who'd lived and worked and struggled. He was human, fully, completely human. He ate and slept and bled. He felt joy and sorrow and everything in between. And every day he worked. He studied ancient texts. He consulted with mages and scholars. He traveled to distant lands, seeking knowledge that might help him restore Elara. Mira worked beside him, equally determined. She'd become a skilled researcher, her sharp mind perfect for piecing together fragments of information. And slowly, so slowly, they were making progress. The seed had begun to glow brighter. The fragment of Elara's soul within it was growing stronger, fed by their efforts, by their hope, by their refusal to give up. "She's close," Mira said, coming to stand beside Kaelen. "I can feel it. We're close." "Yes," Kaelen agreed, pulling the seed from his pocket. It pulsed warmly in his hand, and he thought he felt something. A whisper, a presence, a hint of the woman who'd saved him. "Soon," he said. "Soon, Elara. Hold on just a little longer." He looked down at his hand, at the calluses from work, at the scars from battles, at the proof that he was alive and real and human. And he smiled, because Elara had given him this life, this chance, this hope, and he would give her the same. He would bring her back, no matter what it took, no matter how long. He would keep his promise. The sun set and the stars came out, bright and beautiful against the darkening sky. And in the cottage, by the light of a single candle, Kaelen and Mira bent over their books and scrolls, searching for the answer that would restore the woman who'd saved them both. The hollow night was hollow no more. He was human. He was alive. And he was determined to share that gift with the person who'd made it possible. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning. The end.